They called me too cautious. 12 years of keeping that company's financials airtight, and the word they used when they walked me out was cautious. Not slow, not inefficient. Cautious. Like that was somehow a character flaw instead of the reason their books had never once been flagged in an audit. My name is Marcus Webb. I was the controller at Hartfield Distribution, a mid-sized logistics company out of Columbus, Ohio, that moved about $400 million worth of industrial parts annually. I knew every vendor contract, every reconciliation cycle, every quirk in our ERP system going back to the version we ran before the last two upgrades. I built half the processes we used from scratch. The other half I inherited and fixed. I was 51 years old. I had a mortgage, a daughter in her second year at Ohio State, and 17 days of unused PTO because I never took vacations during quarter close. I mention those things not for sympathy, but because you should understand what was sitting on the table when the CFO called me into his office on the Tuesday morning in March and told me the company was moving in a new direction. The CFO's name was Gerald. Gerald had been at Hartfield for 6 years, which made him practically a newcomer by my standards. He had the kind of smile that showed too many teeth and the habit of saying, at the end of the day, before every sentence that was about to cost someone something. I liked him well enough in the early years. By that Tuesday morning in March, I understood him completely. Marcus, he said, at the end of the day, we need someone in this seat who can move faster with the business. I looked at him across the conference table. There was a manila folder in front of him that he hadn't opened once. HR was sitting to his left. A woman named Brenda, who I'd always gotten along with, and was currently studying the wall behind my head with extraordinary focus. Faster, I said. The business is scaling. We need agility in the finance function. I closed the previous quarter with 0 discrepancies across 14 cost centers, caught a duplicate vendor payment that would have cost us $80,000, and flagged an early sign of inventory shrinkage in the Memphis warehouse that turned out to be a theft ring. I did all of that in the same 90 days. Agility, I said. It's not a performance issue, Marcus. It's a culture fit going forward. That was when the door opened and I saw her for the first time. She walked in like she owned the carpet, which, technically speaking, she might have soon enough. Her name was Kayla, and she was 26 years old, and she was Gerald's niece. I didn't know that last part until about 40 minutes later, when I was sitting in my car in the parking garage staring at my severance paperwork. A colleague texted me. That girl they brought in is Gerald's niece. Did you know? No, I did not know. But the moment I saw the way Gerald's posture changed when she entered the room, that particular combination of pride and protectiveness that has nothing to do with professional admiration, I knew enough. Brenda walked me back to my office. She was apologetic in that specific HR way that means I know this is wrong and I cannot say so. I had 30 minutes to collect my things. I packed slowly, not out of ceremony, but because I genuinely wasn't sure what to take. 12 years accumulates. There were files I'd built, templates I'd designed, a binder of vendor contacts with handwritten notes in the margins going back to 2015. I left the binder. They'd need it more than I would. When the elevator opened in the lobby, I expected to feel something dramatic. Rage, maybe. Or that particular brand of humiliation that comes from being discarded after years of loyalty. What I felt instead was tired. The kind of tired that lives in your shoulders and doesn't respond to sleep. I was in the parking garage, still in my car, still reading the severance paperwork, when my phone buzzed. Not a text this time. A call. The number belonged to Preston Hartfield, son of the company's founder, current VP of operations, and one of 3 people in the building I had considered a genuine ally. I almost didn't pick up. Marcus, his voice was tight. Where are you right now? Parking garage. His voice was tight. Where are you right now? Parking garage. Level 2. Don't leave. I looked at the exit ramp about 40 feet in front of me. Preston, I'm serious. Something's happening up here and I need you to come back upstairs, please. I sat there for a moment. I thought about my mortgage. I thought about my daughter's tuition. I thought about the binder I'd left on my desk. Then I thought about what "something's happening" meant when Preston Hartfield used that particular tone of voice. I turned off the car. The elevator ride back up was the strangest 30 seconds of my professional life. I had walked out of that building as a terminated employee. I was walking back in as... what exactly? I didn't know yet. What I knew was that Preston had met me at the lobby entrance personally, which meant whatever was happening had moved fast. "She's in your system," he said, walking quickly. "Not the department system. My system, the ERP configuration layer that most people at Hartfield didn't even know existed, because there was no reason for them to. It was the back end that sat underneath our accounting software and our inventory management and our AP processing. It was not under any circumstances something you let an unfamiliar person access on her first day." "How did she get credentials?" I asked. Preston's jaw was doing something complicated. "Gerald gave them to her this morning. Said she needed full access to do a comprehensive review." I stopped walking. "He gave a person with no system history admin level credentials to do a comprehensive review on her first day. I know. Gerald doesn't have the authority to. I know, Marcus. I know, Marcus. That's why I called you." We reached the finance floor. Through the glass partition, I could see Kayla at what had been my desk 2 hours ago, moving through screens with the confident speed of someone who had no idea what they were looking at. That specific combination, rapid movement, zero hesitation, is one of the most dangerous things you can encounter in a financial system. Hesitation is what makes you stop and read the warning messages. Preston opened the door and I walked in. Kayla looked up. She had the expression of someone who expected to be complimented. "Hi," she said. "You're Marcus, right? Gerald mentioned you." "What are you doing in the allocation module?" I asked. She blinked. "I'm just cleaning things up. There were a lot of redundant entries." I kept my voice very level. "Which entries did you remove?" "The ones that were duplicated." There were like 6 lines that said the same thing. I looked at the screen. Then I looked at it again, because the first look hadn't fully processed what I was seeing. Those 6 lines she had removed were not duplicates. They were the accrual entries for our 3 largest vendor contracts, each one posted twice per cycle by design, because our ERP required a matching debit and credit entry in separate subledgers to clear properly. Without them, every accounts payable transaction touching those contracts would fail validation at the next processing run, which was scheduled for that Friday, which was 48 hours away and covered roughly $4.2 million in outstanding invoices. She had also, I noticed, changed the default currency setting on 2 international accounts from their functional currency to USD. Without the proper exchange rate tables, every transaction going through those accounts would post at a 111 rate regardless of actual exchange. Our Canadian operations alone would be off by a material amount. "When did you make these changes?" I asked. "Like an hour ago? Maybe a little more." I sat down, not at my old desk, at the workstation beside it. I pulled up my credentials. They still worked because termination processing at Hartfield ran through IT on a 24-hour lag and IT hadn't gotten to me yet. I was aware this created a certain ethical ambiguity. I was also aware that Friday's AP run failing would mean our 3 largest vendors, one of whom had a 48-hour cure period in their contract before invoking penalty clauses, would not get paid on time. Preston was standing behind me. So was Brenda, who had appeared from somewhere. So was Gerald, who arrived about 90 seconds in and whose face cycled through several colors before settling on something between red and gray. "What is he doing here?" Gerald said. "He doesn't work here anymore." "He does today," Preston said. There was something in Preston's voice that I had never heard before. It was the voice of someone who owns 31% of the company's equity and has been very patient for a very long time. Gerald opened his mouth. "Gerald," Preston said, "I'd like you to stand over there and not speak for a few minutes. Can you do that for me?" Here is something they don't tell you about financial systems. The damage is almost never the visible thing. Kayla had deleted some lines and changed some settings, and those actions were reversible in themselves. The problem was the cascade. Every automated process that had run in the hour since her changes had been operating on corrupted parameters. The overnight reconciliation batch had already pre-staged with the wrong data. The vendor matching queue had pulled accounts with the wrong currency codes. Each of those downstream effects had to be identified, logged, and manually corrected before Friday's run, or the corrections would compound instead of resolve. I worked for 4 hours. Preston stayed the entire time. Gerald left after about 40 minutes, and I noted that he took Kayla with him, which was either protective or strategic or both. I didn't explain everything I was doing as I did it. I explained what was necessary for Preston to understand the scope, and I answered questions when asked, and the rest of the time I worked. This is the thing about being methodical that the people who call you too cautious never understand. The method is not the opposite of speed. The method is the speed. There is no faster way to fix a complex problem than to understand it completely before you start touching things. At one point, Preston asked quietly, "Would this have caught you off guard if you'd still been here?" "No," I said, "because she wouldn't have had credentials." He was quiet for a moment. Fair point. By 6 in the evening, the APQ was clean. The accrual entries were restored with a full audit trail documenting the original deletion and the correction. The currency settings were reverted and the affected transactions were flagged for review. I wrote up a summary document, 3 pages, clear language, no jargon, explaining what had happened, what had been corrected, and what would require monitoring through Friday's run. I handed it to Preston and stood up. "The run on Friday should process clean," I said. "You'll want someone to sit on it live, not let it run automated. If anything flags, you need to catch it before the batch closes." Preston looked at the document. Then he looked at me. "Who's going to do that?" "That's not my problem anymore," I said. And I meant it gently, not bitterly. It genuinely wasn't. I had done what needed doing. The rest was theirs to figure out. Marcus. He set the document down. "I owe you an apology. I knew Gerald was pushing for this change, and I didn't push back hard enough. That's on me. I didn't say yes it is, even though it was. I appreciate that. I'd like you to come back. Different title, different reporting structure. You'd report directly to me, not through Gerald, and I'd like to have a conversation about Gerald's role going forward, but that's a separate matter." I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. I thought about what I was going to say on the drive over to that office, and then I thought about how the last 12 years had actually felt. The good parts and the parts where I stayed late fixing things that shouldn't have broken, and the part where I sat in a parking garage at noon reading severance paperwork like I'd done something wrong. "I'll think about it," I said. "That's fair. I want the offer in writing. Compensation, title, reporting line. And I want a conversation about a consulting rate for today." Preston almost smiled. "Also fair. I'm going home. My daughter's coming over for dinner, and I haven't started cooking yet." I took the elevator down. I walked through the lobby, the same lobby I'd walked out of that morning as a terminated employee, and out into the parking garage. I sat in my car for the second time that day. This time I didn't feel tired in the same way. I felt the particular kind of quiet that comes when something has resolved the way it was supposed to, even if it took a wrong turn to get there. I thought about calling my daughter on the way home. I thought about what I'd say. "You know how I always told you that doing things right is slower than doing things fast, but it's not the same as being slow?" She'd heard that speech enough times that she could probably give it back to me word for word. But it had been a useful day to have it proven. The written offer came 2 days later. The title was VP of Finance, 2 levels above where I'd been. The salary was a number that I looked at for a long moment before I allowed myself to feel anything about it. Direct report to Preston, with a seat at the executive table for quarterly reviews. The consulting invoice I submitted for April 8th, 1-day emergency remediation, 4 hours of active work plus documentation, was paid without comment within the week. Gerald tendered his resignation the following Monday. I heard about it from Brenda, who texted me with a single sentence and a period at the end, which told me everything I needed to know about how she felt. Kayla's employment, it turned out, had been terminated the same afternoon I spent fixing what she'd broken. Gerald had apparently attempted to argue that the access error was a system failure rather than user error, and Preston had pulled the audit log, which showed every change time-stamped and credentialed to her login. There's very little ambiguity in an audit log. That's rather the point of them. I started back on the 1st of May. My old desk had been returned to its original configuration by IT, which I appreciated more than I expected to. I brought a new binder, fresh, blank, ready for 12 more years of vendor notes in the margins if that's how it went. On my first day back, Preston stopped by my office around 3 in the afternoon. He leaned in the doorway the way people do when they have something they want to say but haven't quite decided how to say it. "How's it feel?" he asked. I thought about that Tuesday morning in March. The manila folder Gerald hadn't opened. Brenda studying the wall. The parking garage, the tire that lived in my shoulders. "Like I never left," I said. He nodded. "Good." After he left, I sat for a moment in the quiet of the office, My office now, different title on the door. And I thought about the word they had used. Cautious. 12 years of catching what others missed, of reading the warning messages before touching things, of understanding that the method and the speed are the same thing when you do it right. They had meant it as an ending. Turned out it was just a Tuesday,